Relations between the United States and the East African island republic of Genosha remain strained, with the Genosian government refusing to back down from its stated policy of taking whatever steps prove necessary to bring the so-called mutant terrorists to justice. In order to safeguard our people, we are more than ready to act alone. Today on the Comic Book Report, X-Men Extinction Agenda Omnibus from Marvel Comics. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've got another Marvel Omnibus review for all of you. That's right, we are checking out the X-Men Extinction Agenda Omnibus. This is largely an event-driven omnibus, also kind of a gap filler, I believe, between the two Chris Claremont, Jim Lee X-Men Omnibus editions. I know a lot of this content was collected in maybe two hardcover collections from Marvel back in the past. I am excited to see this in an oversized hardcover omnibus edition. Before we jump into the review though, I would just like to say a huge thank you to Organic Price Books for sending over this review copy in exchange for review. If you'd like to pick up this book or any other comic book collected edition in print, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link to them in the video description, and if you see anything on the site you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, The Comic Book Report, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you for considering. Now on with the show. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The comics in this volume were written by Walter and Louise Simonson, Chris Claremont, Fabian Nicieza, and more, and it includes art from Butch Guice, Terry Shoemaker, Arthur Adams, Jim Lee, and more. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 1989. The volume itself collects Uncanny X-Men issues 270 to 272, New Mutants issues 95 through 97, X-Factor issues 60 to 62, X-Men Annual issues 14 and 15, X-Men Spotlight on the Starjammers issues 1 and 2, and material from Fantastic Four Annual issue 23, New Mutants Annual issues 6 and 7, X-Factor Annual issues 5 and 6, New Warriors Annual issue 1, Marvel Comics Presents issues 10 through 17, 24 through 32, 41, 43, 48 through 49, along with Marvel Superheroes issue 2, 6 through 8, Marvel Holiday Special issue 1, and finally Marvel Tales issue 262. Now this is an oversized hardcover edition with beautiful glossy print paper stock, a sewn binding, and a total of 984 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first dedicated look at the front dust jacket cover for this omnibus. Love seeing Havoc front and center with a lot of the mutant cast surrounding him. A really cool, evocative image. There is a direct market cover as well for this omnibus. I'll throw up a quick thumbnail so you can get a little bit of a reference point and can perhaps choose the omnibus cover right for you. And now as we transition to the spine of this omnibus, we have the beautiful Marvel Omnibus logo up top, of course. We have a field of black and the awesome X-Men logo. Really happy to see it. Always looks striking. Extinction Agenda. And then for the standard edition cover, we do have this picture of a mutate Storm on the bottom. I think the direct market might have a different image at the bottom of the spine, but I don't have that as a reference, so just be advised. On the back cover, we have a brief blurb about the collection. We have a lot of the thumbnailed covers for what are included in this book, although I think there are a couple that we don't see here on the back that are included as well, but you'll see that in the contents that I read earlier. But yeah, this is the back cover, and I'll have to admit, while I like the layout, I just don't like that the text is kind of crooked or off-shifted. Kind of throws me off a little bit. Still, again, a nice dust jacket, but that was my only note for me personally. Okay, now I did want to do a dedicated look at this dust jacket cover one final time. This time I'll show you the interior flaps as well, and I'll be sure to actually spread out the dust jacket so you can just see it all at a glance. Now this isn't a wraparound cover or anything like that, but it's still nice to see everything again at a glance, especially for those prospective collectors out there that just want a little bit of a look at everything. After that, I will go ahead and begin to transition to taking a look at the hardcover book itself, because we do have some art printed on the board. Now this actually on the hardback book is a wraparound cover of sorts. We have Jean Grey and Storm predominantly. It's definitely lifted from one of the issues in the collection. On the front cover of the hardback we do have the Extinction Agenda kind of X-Men title there, which I like to see. Nothing on the spine other than the wraparound image. I'll again go ahead and open it up so you can see this all at a glance. I thought that this was a really fun way to go. I'm a little surprised we didn't get like an epic battle scene reprinted here, but I am still happy that we have some cool art wrapped around. Okay, and now a quick look at the binding. So as I mentioned, this is a sewn binding, and my edition has a little bit of an eye here. This is after reading through the volume one time completely, so you can take a look as we go through. I didn't really have much issue at all with gutter loss. Hopefully you'll have the same experience should you choose to pick up this volume. But again, just wanted to give everyone a look. You'll be able to see as well as I flip through. Okay, and the very last thing I did want to show off before we just do our flip through and I talk about the contents a bit more is a bit of a misprint I saw in this book. I'm not sure if this is a global misprint for this whole print run, but it's something to be aware of. I just encountered it as I was reading through. Essentially, it affects maybe 4 or 5 pages. Now, everything is included and it's included correctly. However, it seems to be out of order. This misprint I found does affect pages 418 through 422, give or take. It's basically the end of an issue and right before the next issue began. I noticed as I was reading, all of a sudden I jumped forward and I wasn't sure what was happening, and then I looked at the page numbers and I just thought, well, this is just jumbled a little bit. Unlike some other misprints where they've removed pages, this doesn't affect the completeness of the volume. Again, it's more of a misprint for things being a little jumbled out of order. For me, it wasn't that big of a deal to just flip through a little bit, but I know some collectors out there, you would just want to know. So here we go. I just wanted to make a note. Alright, and as we make our way proper into the collection, after some black end pages, we do have a fun title page with Wolverine and Jubilee, which was really great to see. We have a full creator breakdown and publication information page. This is a huge collaboration kind of event omnibus predominantly, so we have a lot of different titles going on, and with that, a ton of different creators attached, both writers and illustrators. So all of that is laid out in their creator breakdown. Then we have a full numbered table of contents. I cannot tell you how much I love seeing a good table of contents in an omnibus edition, so that was just a delight. Now after that, we do jump right into the first issue in this collection, which if I'm not mistaken is that Fantastic Four like annual, but we basically start with the Days of Futures Present storyline. We jump right into the book. We don't get a ton of context here, we just kind of dive right in. Luckily it is at the beginning of a story arc, so it's really easy to jump aboard, I would say. Things that you might want to read before this storyline specifically though is probably the Days of Futures Past storyline. If not that, just being kind of casually aware of that. Basically it was an alternate timeline where there's, you know, kind of evil mutant hunting kind of people or organizations. We have Rachel Summers coming from that alternate future, and basically this whole story is really focused around Franklin Richards, the son of course, Reed and Sue of the Fantastic Four. Their son, who is a mutant. We basically have a future version of him who's unlocked his full mutant potential, coming through time to kind of prevent his future, reunite with a lost love, heal his fractured mind. It's a little bit, I don't want to say jumbled, but there's a lot in the stew here, but it ends up being a really fascinating story between the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, X-Factor, a lot of the mutant teams at the time. I think that Franklin Richards is such a cool bridge for a lot of years between the mutant community and the Fantastic Four, and this is definitely a great example of that. If you're a fan of Rachel Summers or Rachel Gray, Phoenix, this is also a really fun story because they definitely hint at kind of a love interest between Franklin Richards and Rachel there, and we get to see bits of that. We get to see an exploration of that timeline that Rachel's from, and we get to see kind of the the leader of the Hounds, the kind of ultimate big bad guy trying to chase him through time and try to neutralize him. And it's a really fun, epic storyline that, again, crosses over with a bunch of different titles. I actually thought that this was a phenomenal story. I was so happy it was collected. I had actually, before this omnibus, never had the chance to read Days of Futures Present. I am a fan of Days of Futures Past, and I had heard that this existed, but again, I just never had an opportunity to really make my way through it, and I just found myself enjoying it. I really do like Rachel Summers as a character. Franklin Richards I always find to be kind of fascinating, and so this was a really fun kind of look at that and kind of an alternate history. But yeah, that's really what we start this book with. Now, this next part I will be kind of outpacing my flip through for a little bit here, but I just want to talk more generally about some of the stories included, my thoughts on the art, things like that. Again, this review does contain spoilers, but I just wanted to kind of go through my impressions of this book as I do with a lot of my other reviews. So after Days of Future Present, the next really big story arc we have here is the titular Extinction Agenda. And I do think that this omnibus is properly titled because I do believe this is by far the strongest storyline in the collection, with second billing probably going to Days of Future Present. And in many ways, that is actually kind of the drawback of this omnibus for me, is that we start so strong with these two stories, and I feel like the remainder of this omnibus, for the most part, is just not as striking. It doesn't hit as hard for me. It feels like a lot of fluff or filler material, and I just never feel like we get close to reaching the highs we did earlier in this book. But that first third or half of the omnibus, really those two first major story arcs, they really do hit hard. So Extinction Agenda, I actually used to have the old oversized hardcover edition back in the day. I'd read part of this story before, but again, I never had an opportunity to finish it. I sold that hardcover years and years ago when I thought I was done with comics, and here I am back, and I finally had an opportunity to read this story, and I really loved it. You know, a big blind spot for me with X-Men is that Chris Claremont, Jim Lee era. Again, I used to have those omnibuses years and years ago, probably a decade ago now, and I did sell them before I could complete reading them, and now I've been really hoping to get them back someday. I still do not have them in my collection, though I would love to give them a read and a collect, but I am happy I have this. Like I said, this is kind of right in the middle of that Claremont Lee era, so this is a nice kind of bridge filler for omnibus collectors out there. But why I bring this up is because we do have Jim Lee on pencils for some of those X-Men issues with Chris Claremont, but we have a lot of other teams going on, like New Mutants and X-Factor, and really primarily those three X-Men books really do make up that Extinction Agenda crossover. I would say X-Factor, New Mutants, and Uncanny X-Men. And what exactly is Extinction Agenda? What is this story even about? Well, it does predominantly stem from that nation of Genosha, which is known to have these kind of enslaved beings known as mutates, who are kind of brainwashed, wiped mutant slaves who serve their nation, kind of. It's a really corrupt kind of nation state, and ultimately we have people from Genosha kidnap some of the New Mutant characters, and in the case of this, I think one X-Men. Anyway, the rest of the teams, including Cable, who at this time is leading the New Mutants, all of X-Factor, and then of course those that are part of the X-Men, they basically all go to Genosha to try to liberate those that have been kidnapped. Some of them end up enslaved and kidnapped themselves. Some, like in the case of Rain Sinclair or Storm, are actually turned into mutates. So a lot going on there. The main villain or antagonist for the storyline is Cameron Hodge, who is in kind of a weird machine-like embodiment at this point. A really sinister and just chilling-looking villain. I thought he was a really excellent villain throughout this arc. I really love seeing the X-Men roster at the time. We have Psylocke, who is in her new kind of Quanon form at this era. We have Wolverine, and still in the middle of kind of a fun love triangle between him and Jean Grey, and of course Scott Summers. We do have those two as part of X-Factor showing up. Jubilee is here as well, along with a lot of those New Mutants, and this is really during that bridge where New Mutants is about to become X-Force. So we have Cable at the helm with some of these New Mutant characters. Rain Sinclair is definitely a big focal point of this story arc as well. We have the self-friend Warlock kind of getting taken over and killed, and this is soon after the loss of Doug as well. So New Mutants are really fractured and broken just kind of in general at this moment, and it's just compounded by the Extinction Agenda. But yeah, everyone converges on Genosha. It's a huge kind of a geopolitical nightmare. It's an international incident in the making, and essentially a lot of people kind of off board say we won't stop the mutants from trying to save their friends, but we can't like officially help them in any really meaningful way. So it's sort of like the mutants against this whole country, especially the country as kind of directed by this corrupt Cameron Hodge behind the scenes. But yeah, really a striking story here. Like I said, the high bar for me. Love the action sequences. We get some great moments with Gambit too, which is another favorite. And overall, it's just really memorable. There's a huge sense of stakes here. We have Storm, who begins kind of back in her teenage form, but ultimately ends up coming back to herself, and her body and power and nature is all restored in this story arc too. So a really big development for that character in an important way. Like I said, love seeing the appearances of Psylocke and Wolverine. But yeah, a lot of action here, a lot of really cool dynamics also between Havoc and Cyclops. I'm a huge fan of Havoc, and in this point, he's actually kind of brainwashed by Genosha, and Scott's trying to shake him out of it, so there's a lot of cool battles there, and he becomes a pretty prominent figure in the story arc, which is why he's on that standard cover, of course. But I really enjoyed that. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Havoc, so this feels like a really key storyline. That's my brief overview of the Extinction Agenda. Now, a lot of the art throughout that story and this collection in general is quite strong. You know, this is late 80s, but really early 90s art. The Jim Lee, for me, is my absolute favorite, but a lot of talented artists throughout this collection. Another great story we get not too long after Extinction Agenda that I liked is essentially the return of Proteus. This is another kind of crossover story, and if you've read the earlier story with Moira McTaggart's son Proteus, this was a really, really great sequel that I enjoyed quite a bit. This crossed over, I think, mostly X Factor and I think New Warriors, if I'm not mistaken, a couple other X teams as well. I would say in general the storyline with Proteus is probably the third strongest. Another couple stories we have throughout this collection, we have things that follow like a band of evil mutants around for a while. We do have a Colossus kind of backup story in I think Marvel Comics Presents or whatever that title is. I talked about Marvel Fanfare, something. We have that going on. There is a fun story with Havoc and Wolverine and kind of this woman who claims to be victimized by this group of Egyptian cultists. That's a kind of interesting story as well. But really, once we pass Days of Futures Present and the Extinction Agenda, I do think we're on a bit of diminishing returns with this omnibus. Like I said, that Proteus story was pretty good, and after that, it is really hit and miss for me. With some of those materials from those other comic lines too, a lot of the comic strips we have are only a couple pages long, maybe 10 pages each, rather than a full 30 page issue something. And you feel that a little bit with the narrative. So you have these like 6 to 9 part stories, but they're all pretty small. But nothing really just hit with the same amount of gravity. I did like that a lot of those stories, though, followed like individual mutants. Like we had a whole section following Colossus and a whole section following Havoc, as I mentioned earlier. So that was pretty novel, especially if you like some of those characters. But yeah, again, the stories in many cases just weren't quite as strong. More stories toward the back of this collection as well. We end this book, I believe, with a 2-part kind of selection that follows the Starjammers. So we have Corsair, Binary, and the rest of the Starjammers kind of on an interstellar mission, fighting the Shi'ar Empire in different ways. This was kind of an interesting way to wrap up this book. I do like the Starjammers, but I had a hard time engaging in this storyline. It is fun, older cosmic Marvel fare, though, and it is still kind of a fun addition to this book. I think for me, in this omnibus in general, it does feel a bit like a gap filler. It also feels slightly aimless. I don't really know how else to say that. Again, it really does center around a couple crossover events, but you don't have a lot of the interstitial tissue that make up a good kind of singular run, if that makes sense. Like you'll have omnibuses that collect someone's entire run, and there's usually a good through line, and sometimes you'll have an event omnibus that has an event and all of its tie-ins, so you have kind of a full picture of something. Why this omnibus is so unique is it's almost kind of in the middle of that, and then also, like I mentioned, just kind of filler. Like we have events in here and we have the tie-in or crossover issues that work, but then there are just huge portions of this book that are just random collected mutant stories, and while they're not bad, it does feel like it takes away from the overall vision or through line of this omnibus as a collected edition. Now, if you're a completionist, I do think that this is a great omnibus. Like I said, it's a big gap filler. It includes stories that I think aren't really going to be collected in any other omnibus, or I would be surprised if they were. Obviously, Extinction Agenda is a huge draw. I would say Days of Future Present is a huge draw, and some of these stories were still really fun. Like I like that Proteus story, I like the Havoc story, but there are sections that just felt it just didn't hit me as hard personally, and maybe that's someone else's favorite, and that's awesome. I am still really happy this omnibus edition exists. I love Marvel's direction, kind of printing these oversized hardcovers or collections of them in an omnibus format. I think that that's really great for omnibus collectors out there like myself, who maybe weren't able to get those hardcovers, or they prefer things in bigger omnibus format. I really like that. I think a lot of comic book fans feel similarly about this, and yeah, this was a fun omnibus. Again, other than that one minor misprint as well, I do think it is still a really solid book. And with that misprint, if you're going to have a misprint, I am a fan of one where everything's still included, just maybe a couple pages are out of order there. But yeah, overall, I did have fun with this book. And as you can see, I'm flipping through. I'm in that Starjammers era. Again, this omnibus, it feels like a catch-all as well. I think it really just tried to collect everything largely X-Men related around this period to just fill out this book. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's another reason it collected what it did. But I do think, again, it's a perfect way to fill up your X content, your mutant content, especially between those first two, Chris Claremont, Jim Lee omnibuses, or I guess that 2-volume set. This is a perfect thing right in the middle. I think if you're a fan of some of the other X-Men teams as well, maybe you don't just like Uncanny X-Men, you also like New Mutants, you also like X-Factor. Again, this really pulls in on a lot of that crossover potential there. We get to see a huge array of mutant characters, a big, terrific roster, and I like that we do oscillate between these big crossover books that have just dozens of mutants and a couple kind of like single stories that follow individual mutants or two. I think it's a cool way to have a little bit of everything mutant in the breadth of storytelling. Just again, some of the stories hit a little bit harder than others. I would have loved to see some big banger storylines collected towards the end of this omnibus too, feeling like we were ending on a high bar. I think also the fact that the strongest stories are up front in this collection, again, it just had that feeling of diminishing returns, and that's not necessarily what I love in an omnibus reading experience. That being said, again, I still had fun with it, and this is one I would definitely recommend to X-Men fans if you're kind of a completionist or kind of bigger X-Men fan. For extras, we got a lot of predominantly art-based extras, some behind-the-scenes scenes, and just kind of images, pens and inks, things like that. And that really is the X-Men Extinction Agenda Omnibus from Marvel Comics. Thank you for taking this ride with me through this review, and now all that's left to do is to give this Marvel Omnibus edition a grade. For the soaring high highs of Extinction Agenda and the Days of Futures Present, along with a lot of middling stories, the Comic Book Report is happy to give X-Men Extinction Agenda a C+. This is a Marvel Omnibus I'm still so happy to see in print. While I didn't love seeing a misprint in this volume, I did think it was still a manageable kind of misprint, at least for myself personally, and I loved getting to read a lot of these stories for the first time. Again, the storylines that hit really hard, and I had a ton of fun with it, but there were whole sections of this omnibus that maybe just didn't keep my interest like the rest of it had. The art in this collection is varied, but often really beautiful. A really good look at the mutant scene around the early 90s over at Marvel, and one I again would recommend to bigger X-Men fans out there, but maybe not just your casual X-Men fan. But that was just my thoughts on the X-Men Extinction Agenda Omnibus. I would love to hear yours. What are your thoughts on this run, these storylines? Let me know all that in the comments. Again, a huge thank you to those at Organic Price Books for sending this over, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, that comment we talked about, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thanks everyone, have a good one.